The moon hung low, a chipped silver coin wedged between black pines. Its light dripped across the rutted road like spilled mercury, catching on the edge of Commander Lin's drawn saber and on the sweat-slick brow of the farmer who had never meant to become a soldier tonight. Wei Ren staggered backward, rake handle splintered in his grip, breath sawing in his throat. 3 bandits circled him, their blades hungry for the last coins in his pouch, the dowry meant for his sister's wedding. One lunged. Steel hissed. Wei's knees buckled, but the blow never landed. Instead, a single sharp ring of metal split the night. Lin Ji appeared as if the moon itself had unsheathed him. Tall, lacquered lamellar plates rippling like dragon scales. His saber a shard of frozen starlight. The bandit's sword spun away, clattering into the ditch with a sound too small for a life ending. Lin's follow-through was an economy of violence. A pivot, a whisper of silk, and the second brigand folded around the wound he'd been given, mouth opening in a silent howl. The last man fled into the darkness, crashing through bracken like a wounded boar. Silence rushed back in, broken only by Wei's ragged breathing and the soft drip of blood onto loam. Lin wiped his blade on a fallen leaf, then turned. Lantern light from the roadside shrine painted gold across the hard planes of his face, catching the scar that ran from left temple to jaw, a seam of pale lightning against weathered bronze. He looked way over the way a smith examines a cracked plowshare, measuring, judging, but not yet condemning. "You're bleeding," Lin said. Not a question. Wei glanced at the shallow slice across his forearm, then at the shattered rake. "I'm poorer," he answered, the words tasting of iron. "They took everything but this." He lifted the tattered cloth bundle still clutched in his left hand. Lin's gaze softened. An expression so fleeting Wei wondered if he'd imagined it. The commander sheathed his saber with a soft shunk. Behind him, the shrine's wind bell tinkled, lonely as a widow's prayer. "The road is long tonight," Lin said, "and the wine is shorter than the miles. Sit." He produced a leather flask from his sash, its surface scarred with old campaigns. A single tin cup, dented along one rim, glinted in his other hand. Without ceremony, Lin poured. The liquid caught the moonlight. Liquid garnet, heavy with the scent of plums and smoke. Wei hesitated. In the stories his grandmother told, men who drank with ghosts never returned unchanged. But the night pressed close, full of the smell of his own blood and the wet earth reek of fear. He took the cup. "To roads that cross when stars are blind," Lin intoned, voice low as distant thunder. He drank first, throat working once. Then he reversed the cup and offered it. Wei drank. The wine burned like swallowed sunlight, warmth blooming outward from his chest until the trembling in his hands stilled. When he lowered the cup, he saw Lin watching him with an odd intensity, as though the commander were trying to read the future in the pattern of wine-dark droplets clinging to the rim. "You fought like a cornered wolf," Lin said. "Not trained, but willing to die for 3 copper coins." "Why?" "The coins were silver," Wei replied, "and they weren't mine to lose." He opened the cloth bundle. Inside lay a small jade pendant, carved into the shape of a sparrow. His mother's last gift to his sister before fever took her. The stone glimmered, soft green against Wei's calloused palm. Lin reached to his own throat. His fingers came away with a strip of crimson silk, frayed and sun-bleached, bearing the blackened emblem of a hawk clutching lightning. The banner of a regiment long since ground to dust beneath the boots of larger wars. "Then we are both guardians of things smaller than ourselves," he said. He pressed the scrap of silk into Wei's free hand, closing the farmer's fingers around it with surprising gentleness. A trade, tokens of roads traveled, and roads yet to come. Wei's throat tightened. He had expected gratitude, perhaps a coin. Not this half-poet, half-commander offering brotherhood in the middle of nowhere. He slipped the pendant's cord over Lin's neck instead, the sparrow settling against the commander's breastplate like a living heartbeat. "Until the stars forget their names?" Wei whispered, repeating Lin's earlier toast without knowing what Lin's smile was sharp and sudden as winter sunrise. "Then it is sealed." They poured again. This time the wine tasted of salt, whether from sweat or unshed tears. neither could say. Behind them, clouds swallowed the moon, and the wind rose, carrying the scent of coming rain and distant battlefields. When they parted at dawn, neither looked back. Yet the jade sparrow rested against Lin's heart, and the crimson banner fluttered from Wei's belt like a tongue of fire. Somewhere between the first sip and the last, two strangers had become bound by something older than blood, forged in the crucible of moonlight and spilled wine. The road stretched on, carrying them toward futures neither could yet imagine, one to command armies, the other to stand before an executioner's axe, while above them the stars kept their ancient silence, waiting for the day the oath would be called home. 3 springs bled into 4 winters. The world moved on, as worlds do, and the oath spoken under a bruised moon became the kind of story men tell around dying campfires. Half remembered, half myth, wholly sharp. Lin Ji rode the wind of victories. Each conquest stitched another gold thread into the hawk banner that now snapped above 1,000 spears. They said he could read the pulse of a battlefield the way farmers read weather. They said he had no fear because he had already died once, somewhere on a moonlit road, and death had spat him back out with a jade sparrow clenched between his teeth. None of them knew the sparrow was only a farmer's talisman, or that Lin touched it each night before sleep, searching for cracks the way other men search for sins. Across the valley, Wei Ren bent over rice shoots the color of new bronze. The war had not reached this postage stamp of earth yet, but its echo arrived in different forms. Taxes, conscriptions, the hollow clack of the recruiting drum that rolled through market squares like distant thunder. He carried the crimson banner tucked inside his shirt now, folded small and secret. The silk had faded to the color of dried persimmons. Yet when the sun struck it through the weave of his coat, it flared like a fresh wound. His wife, May, teased him about the strange square of cloth he never washed, never hung out to dry. "It smells of iron and old stories," she said, wrinkling her nose. Wei only smiled and pressed it flatter against his heart. In the 3rd year, drought cracked the paddies open. May's cough worsened, a small wet sound that fluttered in the night like a trapped bird. The village elder demanded 2 men for the provincial army, payment in flesh for the tax collector's mercy. Wei's name was the second drawn. He kissed May's fevered forehead, tucked the jade sparrow he'd never returned into her palm, and left before dawn. The recruiter's whip snapped once, a sound that traveled farther than it had any right to. Lin, meanwhile, stood atop the walls of Yenling Fortress watching snow fall in slow, deliberate sheets. A courier had arrived that morning bearing news of a peasant uprising in the south. Nothing unusual, except the rebel leader's banner was described as crimson silk, ragged at the edges, bearing the sigil of a hawk. Lin's hand went to his own chest, to the cool weight of the sparrow. He told himself coincidence was a fool's comfort, yet he ordered the courier to ride back for details and to bring the banner if it could be taken alive. Winter deepened. Wei learned the weight of a spear and the language of dying men. He kept the folded banner beneath his gambeson. It absorbed the sweat of forced marches and the blood of small skirmishes until the hawk embroidered their bled into the silk like a bruise. He wrote letters he never sent, May's name traced in charcoal on scraps of bark, always beginning "I remember the taste of plums and the way the moon held its breath." The letters never reached her. May died in the spring, coughing up petals of blood while the rice shoots withered. The village buried her beneath the old pear tree. No one thought to send word to a conscript whose regiment had marched beyond the last map's edge. Lin received the banner 3 months later, captured from a rebel camp after a firefight that left 30 men silent. The silk was scorched along one edge, the hawk's eye a blackened hole. He spread it across his campaign table under the flicker of war lamps and saw, stitched into the hem in thread now the color of rust, a single character, Wei. The name struck him like a blade between ribs. He dismissed his officers with a gesture, closed the tent flap, and sat alone with the scrap of cloth that smelled of smoke and distant rain. Somewhere in the night, a nightjar cried once and was still. By autumn, Wei's rebellion had become legend, small, fierce, doomed. They fought not for kings but for rice and the right to bury their dead in their own fields. Each defeat sharpened their desperation. Each victory felt like a prayer shouted into the wind. The end came at a bridge over the Jade River. Wei's band was outnumbered 10-1, hemmed in by Lin's elite cavalry. Snowmelt roared beneath the planks, white and merciless. Wei stood at the center, banner raised high, the crimson silk snapping like a fresh wound against the gray sky. He saw the general's standard approaching, black banner, golden hawk, and knew the shape of his death before the arrows flew. He did not know the general wore a jade sparrow beneath his armor, or that Lin's first order had been to take the rebel leader alive, no matter the cost. Two brothers, separated by years and the ravenous machinery of war, moved toward each other across a bridge neither had chosen. The banner between them burned brighter than winter sun. Behind them, the river kept its ancient silence, carrying their reflections toward different fates. One to command, one to stand before the axe. And somewhere in the hush before steel met steel, the oath they had spoken beneath a moon now long dead echoed louder than any trumpet call. An oath that had traveled with them through drought and conquest, through love lost and battles won, waiting for the day the stars would finally forget their names. The execution ground stank of pine tar and winter iron. Dawn had not yet cracked the horizon, but torches ringed the scaffold in a jagged halo that made every face look half alive, half ghost. Snow hissed underfoot, salted pink where a careless guard had trod through yesterday's blood. 3 drumbeats rolled across the square, slow, deliberate, the heartbeat of a city preparing to forget a man. Wei Rin knelt at the block, wrists bound with rope that had once tethered oxen. His coat hung in frozen tatters. Beneath it, the crimson banner clung to his ribs like a second skin, too faded now to show the hawk, yet still bright enough to shame the snow. Over his shoulder, the executioner's axe caught the torchlight and threw it back in cruel orange winks. The crowd was restless. Merchants shivering in foxfur, soldiers trying not to meet each other's eyes, children hoisted on Father's shoulders for a better view of death. They had come for a rebel's end, a spectacle to warm their bones against winter's bite. They whispered that this Wei Ren had once been a farmer, that he had fought under a banner stolen from a great house, that he had stolen more than silk. He had stolen hope, and hope must always be paid for with a head. Wei's breath plumed white, steady as a man counting stars. He thought of May's grave beneath the pear tree, of rice shoots he would never see bend in summer wind, of letters never sent. He thought of a moonlit road and a commander who had once poured wine into a tin cup and said, "Until the stars forget their names." The drums paused. In the hush, the axe rose. A single horse's scream cut the square like a blade through silk. Hooves struck cobblestone in a staccato roll, too fast, too precise for the usual languid parade of authority. The crowd parted, stumbling aside as a black charger burst through, nostrils flaring crimson in torchlight. Astride it, a figure cloaked in storm blue, cloak snapping like a banner at sea. Snow exploded in his wake. Torch flames bent as if bowing. Commander Lin Ji reined in so sharply that the horse reared, iron shoes sparking against stone. His armor gleamed, no parade lacquer, but battle-scarred lameller still carrying the dust of forced marches. At his throat, a jade sparrow flashed once, a shard of green lightning. The executioner froze mid-swing, axe trembling above his head like a question mark. Lin did not dismount. He sat tall, saber drawn but lowered, point resting against the snow as if pinning the entire square to silence. His gaze swept the scaffold once, found Wei's eyes, and held. A murmur rippled outward. "General Lin? Here? For this wretched rebel?" Lin's voice, when it came, was soft enough that only those closest heard the first words, yet it carried farther than any shout. "That banner," he said, nodding toward the scrap of crimson at Wei's back. "I know it." The magistrate stepped forward, red-faced, robes flapping like a startled rooster. "General, this man is condemned." "The law?" "The law kneels when memory stands," Lin replied. He lifted his saber not as a threat, but as a question. "Whose law forgets the cup we drank beneath a moon that no longer rises?" Wei's lips moved, no sound emerging, yet Lin answered as if he had spoken aloud. "I remember." Drumbeats faltered. Snowflakes, fat and slow, began to fall, each one catching torchlight before vanishing into crimson footprints. Lin urged his horse forward until the charger's breath stirred the fringe of Wei's hair. From his saddlebag he drew a flask. Same scarred leather, same dented tin cup. He poured. The wine steamed in the cold, smelling of plums and distant summer. "Drink," he commanded, not to Wei but to the square, to the magistrate, to the executioner whose axe now wavered like a leaf in wind. "Witness the oath." Wei lifted bound hands. Lin leaned down, steadying the cup between them. The wine trembled, rippling with torchlight and snowfall, a tiny storm contained in metal. Wei drank. Lin drank. The cup clinked softly as Lin returned it to the snow. Then Lin straightened, saber, rising until its tip hovered level with the magistrate's throat. "This man is mine, by blood, by banner, by the silence between heartbeats. Cut him, and you answer to more than law." The magistrate sputtered, but his eyes darted to Lin's regiment now forming at the square's edges. Silent, disciplined, a wall of steel and breath. Somewhere among them, a single banner unfurled. Black silk, golden hawk, the same hawk that had once flown above Wei's ragged rebellion. Wei felt the rope around his wrists loosen, cut by a soldier whose face he did not know but whose eyes carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken debts. He stood, legs numb, banner sliding from his shoulders to trail in the snow like a comet's tail. Lin extended a gauntlet hand. Snowflakes melted against the metal. Wei took it, palm against steel, farmer's calluses meeting general scars. Behind them, the drums remained silent. The axe lowered, its edge kissed the block once, soft, apologetic. Then stilled above, the first pale sliver of dawn cracked the sky, and somewhere beyond the city walls, a lark began to sing, as if the world itself had exhaled. The oath had come home, not with thunder, but with the quiet certainty of a hand extended across the gulf between who we were and who we might yet become. The courtyard of Yanling Keep was built to swallow sound and turn it into judgment. High granite walls funneled every gasp, every curse, every clink of mail into a single throat of stone that roared it back at the men standing in the circle below. Snow had been swept aside to bare the execution flagstones. Morning frost silvered the cracks like old scars remembering the blade. Lin Ji stood at the circle's heart, cloak discarded, lamellar plates unbuckled to the waist so the scar from yesterday's duel gleamed raw against his ribs. Blood had soaked the bindings and dried black. A twin to the rope burns livid around Wei Ren's wrists. Between them, 2 sabers lay crossed on the ground. Lin's ancestral blade and the executioner's axe, both still wet around them. The keep's entire garrison pressed shoulder to shoulder, a living wall of breath and iron. Officers who had followed Lin through a dozen campaigns stood beside farmers who had followed Wei through a single desperate harvest. Rumor had outrun truth. Some whispered the general had gone mad. Others swore the farmer was the general's long-lost brother. All of them knew the law demanded a head. The duel had been demanded by Captain Ho, Lin's second, a man whose loyalty had always come with an invoice. Ho stepped forward now, helmet tucked under his arm, voice carrying the crisp authority of a man who has never knelt to anyone. "General, the penalty for mutiny is death. The rebels struck your colors, led men against your supply lines. If you spare him, you stain every rank you wear." Lin's answer was quiet, meant for the circle's center alone, yet the walls flung it wide. "Then let the stain be mine to carry." A ripple moved through the crowd, part outrage, part wonder. Wei, still bound, lifted his chin. Dirt and dried blood streaked his face, but his eyes held the same steady refusal that had kept him silent under torture. Lin turned to him. The courtyard hushed as if the very wind had been ordered to still. Wei Ren, farmer of Willow Bank, once rebel, once brother by oath. "Do you submit to judgment?" Wei's voice cracked, but the words rang clear. "I submit to the oath, not to the axe." A murmur rose, was strangled into silence by Lin's raised hand. The general moved to the crossed blades. Instead of lifting his saber, he knelt. Slow, deliberate, knees hitting frost with a sound like breaking ice. Gasps rippled outward. A captain reached instinctively for his sword, then froze, Unsure whether to defend or arrest his own commander, Lin drew the executioner's axe toward him, the haft scraping stone. With his dagger he cut the rope around Wei's wrists, then sliced a shallow groove across his own forearm, reopening yesterday's wound. Blood welled bright, dripping onto the axe's dull edge. "This axe has tasted my blood," he said, loud enough for the back ranks to hear. "It will taste no more that belongs to me." He lifted the axe, not in threat but like a standard. Snowflakes touched the warm steel and vanished. When he spoke again, his voice carried the cadence of a vow spoken years ago beneath another moon. "Listen, all of you who stand witness. When this man and I drank from one cup, we swore brotherhood until the stars forgot their names. Stars are stubborn. They remember. I will not break what heaven itself has sealed." Captain Ho stepped forward, hand on hilt. "Then break the law instead? The army stands on law, General. Without it, we are bandits." Lin's eyes found Ho's, calm as winter water. "An army that forgets mercy is already bandits." He turned to the circle. "Who here has followed me because I led them to victory, not to slaughter? Who here has bled beside Wei Ren because he fed their children when granaries burned?" Silence answered, thick, uncomfortable. Then, from the rear rank, a single farmer stepped forward, quilted armor patched with sackcloth. He knelt. Another followed. Then a third. The motion spread like spilled wine through cloth. Soldiers lowering spears, officers unbuckling swords, all of them kneeling in a ragged circle whose center was two men and a bleeding axe. Captain Ho's face cycled through rage, calculation, and, finally, grudging respect. He looked at the kneeling sea, at Lin's steady hand still holding the axe aloft, at Wei's quiet dignity. Slowly he too knelt. Lin released the axe, fell with a dull clang, edge-biting stone. From his belt he drew the dented tin cup that had traveled every campaign, its rim scarred by 100 nights. He poured from the same leather flask, wine dark as memory, smelling of plums and campfires long cold. The cup passed from his hand to Wei's. When Wei drank, the wine was warm, metallic with a hint of both their blood. The courtyard listened to the small, mortal sound of swallowing. Lin stood, raised Wei to his feet, and spoke to the kneeling circle. "No man here loses rank. No man here loses honor. What we lose is the habit of forgetting who we fight for. From this day, the banner you carry bears not my hawk alone, but also the sparrow that feeds every field." He turned to the keep's banner pole. With his dagger he cut the black hawk free and tied Wei's faded crimson banner beneath it, the two fabrics streaming together in a sudden gust. Predator and prey, general and farmer, wound and scar now stitched into a single pennant. Snow began to fall in earnest, soft and forgiving, covering the blood on the stones. Somewhere above the walls, the first lark of morning called, not triumph, not lament, but the simple, stubborn note of another day beginning. The circle rose as one. No cheers, no speeches, just the quiet scrape of boots on frost and the soft clink of armor settling back into place. They filed away, leaving the axe where it lay, edge already rimed with ice, a monument to a mercy that had cost less than anyone expected and more than some could yet understand. Behind them, Lin and Wei stood alone. The tin cup lay between them, now empty except for a single red droplet trembling at the bottom. Catching torchlight like the last star, refusing to forget its name, Lin met Wei's eyes and, for the first time since the moonlit road, smiled without the weight of rank. "Brother," he said. Wei answered with the same word, and the courtyard walls hurled it skyward, where the snow carried it away to places battles never reach. The crossroads had not changed, yet everything had. The same moon climbed the same notch between black pines, but its silver now felt deliberate, as though it had spent 15 years polishing itself for this exact return. The road still bore the old wagon ruts, though grass had softened them into scars rather than wounds. Even the wind carried the same resinous breath of pine and distant snow, but beneath it lingered a faint sweetness, late summer hay from the low fields, cut and curing under stars that had, stubbornly, refused to forget their names. Lin Ji arrived first. He wore no armor, only a plain robe the color of river stones. belted with a sash that had once been crimson but had faded to the hue of dried persimmons. His saber was not at his side. The weapon that had carved a path through 10 provinces now hung above a farmhouse hearth, its edge dulled by seasons of splitting kindling. The scar along his jaw caught the moonlight the way a cliff face catches dawn. Quietly, unapologetically. He carried 2 things: the dented tin cup, still bearing the ghost of old wine stains, and a small cloth bundle no larger than a man's fist. Wei Run came from the south path, leading a single donkey loaded with bundles of cedar shingles. His hair was threaded with gray like frost creeping into moss, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into maps of every season he had rebuilt roofs and buried neighbors. He walked with the slight hitch of an old knee injury earned in a skirmish no chronicle would record. At his belt hung a strip of faded red silk, its embroidered hawk long since unraveled into bare threads. They met where the roads kissed, neither quickening nor slowing. The silence between them was not awkward. It was the hush of 2 men who had already said everything important and now only needed air and distance to finish the sentence. Lin lifted the flask. Same leather, darker now, scarred by countless campfires and 1 winter spent frozen to a saddle. He uncorked it. The scent of plums and smoke rolled out like a memory refusing to die. Into the dented cup he poured until the wine trembled at the rim, black-red under moonlight. Wei set down his bundle, cedar shingles tied with twine, and took the cup. Their fingers brushed. Farmers' calluses against soldiers' scars. Both sets earned by holding on when letting go would have been easier. The first sip was silence. The second sip was cicadas. The third sip was the past settling into the present like silt at the bottom of a river. Lin spoke first, voice soft as new snow. The stars have not forgotten. Wei answered with the exact words from 15 years ago, but now they carried weight rather than hope, a vow tested rather than given. Until the stars forget their names. A lark called somewhere in the dark fields, the same note the sparrow had sung the night they first poured wine. The echo was so precise that both men looked up, half expecting to see the tiny moonlit bird perched on an invisible branch. Instead they saw only the moon, round and unblinking, the color of polished jade. Wei reached into his pocket and drew out the sparrow pendant. The stone was warm from his body, its surface worn smooth by years of being fingered during sleepless nights. Lin produced the scrap of crimson banner, edges frayed, hawk threadbare, yet still carrying the faint iron scent of battlefields. Without speaking, they knelt. The earth between the wagon ruts was soft from yesterday's rain. Their knees sank easily. With bare hands they dug a hole no wider than a rice bowl, working side by side as if they had done this every spring of their lives. Into the hollow they placed the pendant and the banner, side by side, survivors of different storms. Lin covered them first, pressing earth over silk and jade with the heel of his hand. Wei followed, smoothing the soil until no trace remained. When they stood, their shadows overlapped on the road like 2 halves of a seal. The flask still held a swallow. Lin offered it. Wei drank, then Lin. The last drop caught the moonlight and held it for a heartbeat before vanishing. They did not embrace. They did not speak of victories or graves, of the pear tree under which May now slept, of the saber that split kindling instead of spines. The silence was complete and companionable, the kind only brothers can share when the story has already been told. Wei gathered his shingles. Lin folded the empty cup into his sleeve. They turned in opposite directions, one toward the low fields glimmering with fireflies, the other toward the dark line of mountains where a hearth waited beside a dulled blade. At the first bend of the road, each paused and looked back. The crossroads was empty, moonlight pooling like quiet water. Only the faintest mound of freshly turned soil marked where 2 oaths had been laid to rest together. Above them, the stars burned on, ancient and unblinking, still refusing to forget. And somewhere in the distance, a lark sang once more, brief, bright, and gone, leaving the night itself to finish the vow in the only language left. Silence, and the soft sound of 2 men walking home beneath a moon that had, after all, kept every promise.